Hello, everyone. On this occasion, I will explain about my research entitled Plagiarism and AI Assistant Misuse in the Web Programming, Unfair Benefits and Characteristics. I'm Oscar Karnalim from Maranatha Christian University, Indonesia. So, we know that recent advances on AI complicates identification of plagiarism. Why? Because students might use generative AI such as ChatGPT-3 to inappropriately help them completing assessments. Plagiarism detection's conventional comparison across submissions is not applicable for that issue because such an AI-assisted submission is typically unique. In programming, this becomes more complex due to the development of many programming languages. Most of the detectors only focus on well-established languages like C or C++, or the most popular ones like Java and Python. Web programming languages such as HTML, JavaScript, and CSS are only covered by few similarity detectors, though such languages are quite common in academia and industry. So we are interested to develop a similarity detector and AI assistant detector for web programming. As our initial pilot study, we conducted a control experiment about unfair benefits of plagiarism and AI assistant misuse. We also asked the participants' perspective about AI assistant in completing assessments. So a control experiment was conducted with tutors and high-performing students. Although they were unlikely to engage in academic misconducts, they often assessed other students' works and engaged with students. They knew about how to plagiarize web programming submissions and how to use AI assistance from general student perspective. So 16 participants were randomly divided into two groups, group 1 and group 2, and then asked to participate in 3 sessions. The first sessions asked students to complete a web programming task independently. For group 1, the task was about developing a simple website for ordering foods and drinks called FT. And the second task for the group 2 is similar, but it is more about tutoring schedules. On the second session, students were asked to complete a web programming task with ChatGPT. For both groups, the tasks were swapped. So group 1 completed FT ALT, while group 2 completed FT. Any interaction with ChatGPT were manually recorded and reported. The third session asked students to complete a web programming task with a submission to Plagiarize. Each participant was asked to swap their submissions from the first session, and then they plagiarized the signed submissions. Any changes in the code were recorded and then reported. At the end of the third session, participants were asked about what factors that might be useful to differentiate AI-assisted submissions from the original ones. We also asked about their perspective of AI assistance in completing programming assessments. Unfair benefits were measured based on test marks and completion time. For plagiarism, submissions from the first session were compared to those from the third session. And for AI assistant misuse, it is essentially the same, except that submissions from the first session were compared to those from the second session. Characteristics of plagiarized submissions and AI-assisted submissions were qualitatively summarized from participants' reports about how they had disguised their act of plagiarism and how they had used AI assistance. Participants' perspective about AI assistance was quantitatively analyzed with any free text responses qualitatively summarized. So, what are unfair benefits of plagiarism and AI assistant misuse? So, for both tests, plagiarizing participants had comparable test marks to those who completed the task independently. This also applied to AI-assisted participants. The differences were not statistically significant. Plagiarizing participants spent less time in completing both tests, only around 20% of time spent by independent participants, with p-values less than 0.001. AI-assisted participants also spend less completion time, although it is still longer than that of plagiarizing participants. They only spend half of the time compared to independent participants, with p-values less than 0.01. AI assistant was more difficult to use as the generated code needed to be understood before embedded to one's work. Further, in some cases, the generated code was not completely correct. And this is the characteristic of plagiarized submissions. So they typically share the same program semantic with the original ones, but they might be disguised with some changes in the color, identifier names, HTML text, constants, and HTML position. You can see the detail in the table. And what are the characteristics of AI-assisted submissions? So participants typically started using ChatGPT by breaking down the task to several subtasks and then asked ChatGPT to generate codes for each subtask. For each generated code, participants embedded that to their own work and then updated it if necessary. ChatGPT and AI assistants were quite complex to use and only provided partial solutions. Consequently, slow-paced students might not be able to modify and integrate the generated code to their own work. They might revert to plagiarize their colleagues' work if accessible, as that was more time efficient. Generally, AI-generated submissions were more complex, employing uncommon syntax and libraries, especially for JavaScript and PHP. The submissions might also less readable as some identifier names were generic. The next one is about perspective of AI assistants. Participants agreed that AI assistants could help slow-paced students in completing programming tasks. Although they were aware that AI-generated code was not really understandable, they agreed that slow-paced students might still use it for seeking help. If participants were tutored, they were able to differentiate AI-generated code from the original ones. AI-generated code tended either to be uncommon or not to have high code quality. Participants did not really believe the correctness of AI-generated code. Based on their follow-up responses, the generated code sometimes did not work, or integrating the code needed a lot of work. Participants were quite neutral about recommending the use of AI assistants for completing both programming and general tasks given proper acknowledgement. AI assistant might be useful to deal with simple and common tasks, but it was not really helpful for the complex ones. So, as the conclusion, first, with plagiarism, students might get comparable marks to those who has completed the task independently with a shorter amount of time. This also applies for AI-assisted submission, except that the completion time is quite longer. Plagiarized and independent submissions usually share the same program semantic, and some common disguises are color change, identifier mining, identifier renaming, HTML text change, constant change, and HTML repositioning. AI-assisted submissions tend to have complex syntax and libraries. Further, it might use general identifier names. Students agreed that AI assistant could be helpful, though the generated solution were not really understandable. They were quite neutral about the correctness of AI-generated code and recommending the use of AI assistants for completing tasks given proper acknowledgement. For the future work, we plan to develop a similarity detector that can handle common disguises in web programming. And we are also interested to develop an AI system detector for the same domain that can rely on code anomaly or code quality. Thank you.